start by removing the battery. Disconnect the terminals. I'm going to go ahead and remove the bracket here. We'll go ahead and remove the J hooks, and we'll grab the battery and remove it from the vehicle. Now what I'm going to do is go ahead and press down on this tab, wiggle that off, press these tabs out, and pull this harness off to the side. Now I'm going to go ahead and pop these little retainer tabs off, lift up, and pull out. Reach in, grab your air filter. Set that aside. Using a 10mm ratchet, we're going to go ahead and start removing the bolts here that secure the box. There's one here and there's one in the back. Now we're using a 10mm and a swivel socket with some extensions to go ahead and loosen that back bolt. And I'll reach down in there and pull that out. I'm going to go ahead and use a Phillips head on this clamp right here. Now what we're going to do is remove this front intake tube off of the airbox. I'm going to go ahead and start grabbing the box. There is a rubber grommet right here securing this in place. And what we want to do is lift up and work this box away. We want to pull this rubber intake hose off of this, as well as this tube right here out of this rubber grommet. I'm going to go ahead and remove the ECU, just kind of set it up. So there's a 10mm bolt here, and then there's two right here. Now we're going to go ahead and pull this box out. And now we're going to go ahead and pull the intake box out of the intake tube and this rubber vent port up top, like so. And we're just going to try and manipulate this box out of place. Next, we're going to go ahead and remove this 10mm bolt. There would normally be two bolts, but one of them is missing from our particular vehicle. So let's go ahead and remove that. Go ahead and pop that piece off there. We'll set that aside. I'm going to have to remove the wheel. Our particular vehicle has a locking lug nut here. We already loosened that. I'm going to go ahead and take the wheel off. So we're going to go ahead and pop off these little plastic caps here. When pull this down, I'm going to go ahead and repeat pulling these pins for underneath the front of the vehicle. I'm just going to gently pull this liner back. Using a 10mm socket or wrench, you can go ahead and remove this box, the bolt right there for the intake box. So up here behind the bumper, but in front of the airbox, there is a last 10mm bolt. You can run your hand right up underneath the front of the bumper and up to that bolt and go ahead and remove that. That should allow us to move this box a little more. I'm just going to go ahead and lower this down and out of the vehicle. Now while you're trying to do this, there's the upper portion of the intake and a lower portion. You're going to try and work them both out through the wheel well area at the same time. So here's the upper portion of the tube and then the lower portion, and it connects right here. So you can twist this and it should pop off. There we go. Now you can go ahead and remove both pieces. All right, using our 1/4" ratchet, 1/4" extension, and a 7/32 deep socket, I'm going to come around back here, and that's going to help us get to that hose clamp. A little bit of movement, but it's working. Get that moving. I'm going to pop off a couple of hoses in the back here. I have one on the back and a clamp. I'm going to pop that out. And we're going to go ahead and flex this intake tube. I'm going to work it back and forth until we can pop that off. I'm going to use a flathead screwdriver to gently pry up. I'm going to work this back and forth. All right, and go ahead and remove that tube. All right, using your pliers, I want to go ahead and remove this clamp. I'm going to come down below. Remove this clamp here. Pop this hose out of this retainer and then remove that clamp down below. You want to go ahead and tuck a rag or a towel up underneath here, because we're going to remove this hose here and there might be some residual coolant in that. And go ahead and pull that hose up and off. Remove this hose off of the throttle body. We're going to remove this larger hose up top. Just grab that, gently twist it. That is plastic, so don't crush it. Once you have that loose, go ahead and remove this entire unit from the vehicle. And go ahead and take the hose, line that up and work that down. Before install this end, we want to go ahead and put on 2 hose clamps. And then we'll install the other end. Using a 1/4" ratchet, I'm going to go ahead and put this hose clamp on. I'm going to repeat for the other side. Using a Phillips head screwdriver here, we're going to go ahead and remove these screws. What we're going to do is we're going to swap over a sensor right here. On the top of the air filter box, I'm going to grab the screws here. Go ahead and install the sensor into the new intake tube. Install the supplied screws. You want to snug these down. We're going to take the spacer here that has the threaded ends. I'm going to apply some Loctite on these threads right here. And this is just a blue Loctite, so if you ever want to remove it later on, you can, but it won't vibrate loose. I'm going to thread that into this mount right here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take the intake tube that we just put the sensor into. There's a port right here, and it comes around, and there's a smaller section here. We want to go ahead and take the smaller rubber tube, slide that on, push it on as far as it'll go. Now what we're going to do is take the hose clamps. We're going to put one inboard one with the nut facing upward. The lower one, we're going to put it facing downward. You're going to work this tube in. You're going to position this so we can get that rubber tube onto the throttle body. Once you get that lined up, you can wiggle that down into place. All right, so as you work this intake tube onto the throttle body, you also want to pay attention to this mounting tab. And that is what this is for. I'm going to slide that into place and make sure that that intake tube is bottomed out on the throttle body. So we can go ahead and tighten up the top clamp. We're going to use our 7mm. I'm going to go ahead and put a washer on. Grab one of these supplied nuts here. I'm going to use our 10mm. We don't want to tighten this completely yet. We want to have a little bit of flexibility until we get the lower portion installed. So we're going to take one of the original factory hose clamps and set this onto the hose. Then we're going to take another regular hose clamp and just slide that over the end here. Let's go ahead and get this installed. This is going to connect from here to here. Let's go ahead and work this side on. And then we'll go ahead and slide this end on. Using your pliers, just open up that clamp, work it on. Then we'll work this one down. And we'll go ahead and get that one snugged up. And we'll just use our flathead screwdriver and snug that one up. All right, we have another one of these rubber spacers here. I put a little bit of blue Loctite on the threads. We're just going to go ahead and get that threaded into the frame right here. And just snug that down by hand. And you want to go ahead and slide the other rubber collar over the other pipe. Once you have the rubber sleeve on, it should be about halfway in. And you can go ahead and install both of your clamps. Go ahead and feed the pipe up into the engine compartment here. So before you install the lower portion of the intake, we want to go ahead and put the clamp on the upper rubber boot. That's going to lock that into place and prevent it from pushing back up on the other tube while we press the lower portion onto the upper. Then we're going to go ahead and install the lower clamp. And we're going to go ahead and slide this bracket up into this. We're just going to snug up that bolt a little bit. We're not going to make it too tight. Now take your other hose clamp, slip it over the neck there. Let's go ahead and install the filter. Right, slip the filter up under the, or up into the bumper area. Go ahead and work it onto the cone. I want to go ahead and tighten that clamp down. All right. So we're going to go ahead and hold this mount and just kind of push that in a little bit. I want to make sure we get a good mounting surface here. Go ahead and tighten that down. Now from up top, we have a good access point to these clamps that we had just installed for the adapter. I'm just going to go ahead and make sure those are tight. So we're just going to grab the intake tube, push it up a little bit into this mount, and we're going to tighten this down. And we're going to use a pick and get it in between this little tab spacer right here, press it down and pry out, and do it on both sides. I'm going to work our way down this cover unit. Do the same thing. I'm going to pry these out. I'm going to go ahead and open up this entire case. This will expose the wire harness. So go underneath, pop the harness out. And gently remove it from this case. Now what we're going to do here is we're just going to clean up this harness because it has some dried, crunchy pieces from the old components here. And we had removed that big plastic harness. We don't need that anymore because there's nothing for it to attach to, and we want to kind of clean up the engine bay. So what we're going to do is take some electrical tape. I'm going to start back here, and we're going to go ahead and start wrapping the housing. Get around the plastic. Give some slack here. Go ahead and cut the tape. You can go ahead and terminate the end right here. And you have a nice finished wrapped harness. Now take the harness, drop it right down around the back, feed it up underneath, and take your connector and plug it into the mass airflow. Now I'm going to go ahead and install the 3 bolts for the ECU. And then we have 2 over here. Just going to go ahead and snug that gently. Do the same for the other 2. Now let's go ahead and install the battery. Get your tray installed first. Drop that down into place. Grab your battery. Lower that into position. Now I'm going to go ahead and lower our J-bolts down into position. Once you get one hooked up, hold that in place. Get the other one hooked up. Once they're hooked, you can grab the center bar and pull up. You can hold them both, and then use your 10mm and snug the bracket down. You want to tighten it just so that there's no more slack in it and securing that battery in place. Now we're going to go ahead and install our terminals here. And using your 10mm socket or ratchet wrench, I'm going to go ahead and snug these down. Now with the intake installed, I want to go ahead and start the vehicle. Everything's started up fine, there's no check engine lights, engine is running smooth. Now I want to go ahead and reinstall the fender liner, tucking this up behind the front bumper. I'll go ahead and start getting our buttons pushed in. I'm going to go ahead and install the rest of our plastic push pins around the whole bottom chin of the bumper. I'm going to go ahead and reinstall the wheel, get that lined up. You want to go ahead and get the lug nuts all started by hand. I'm going to go ahead and snug up these lug nuts. Now I'm going to go ahead and torque the wheels to 79 foot-pounds. I'm going to do this in a crisscross pattern.